Parliament to assert itself from the executive? Could Ghana's hung parliament be the cure for what is normally said, the minority have their say and majority have their will? Could the current situation lead to the strict oversight in our governance structure that was previously missing, especially for some of us as regards the work of the various committees? It is our hope that today's discussion will seek answer to some of these questions. Just a word about CDD-Ghana. CDD-Ghana is a policy think tank dedicated to promoting democracy, good governance, and inclusive development. CDD-Ghana's research outputs and other services are available to and used by governmental and non-governmental agencies, African regional bodies, development partners, as well as researchers and the public. With the array of experts that we are proud to have assembled here this morning, I'm confident we will have fruitful deliberations and outcomes that will advance our democracy, governance, and development. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for being with us today. Thank you.
It is my pleasure at this moment to introduce our moderator for this morning's roundtable discussion. Our moderator is currently a senior lecturer at University of Ghana, Department of Political Science. He was a Donahue Institute Scholar on United States political thought at the University of Massachusetts in 2014. He is a visiting lecturer to 12 Master of Research and Public Policy universities in Africa, including University of Lagos, University of Ibadan, University of Dar es Salaam, University of Nairobi, and the University of Botswana. He was a Maria Sibylla Marian Institute for Advanced Studies in Africa Fellow on Parliaments and Democracy in Africa. He has worked closely with and for numerous policy think tanks, including the Partnership for African Social and Governance Research based in Nairobi, Kenya. Center for International Development Issue Management based in Netherlands. The Institute for Development Studies at the University of Sussex. The Institute for Democratic Governance. The Frederick Ebert Stimpy. The United Nations Development Program. The Varieties of Democracy Project based in the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. The Ghana Armed Forces Command and Staff College, the German Africa Governance Partnership Organization, and the Social Science Research Council based in New York. He has published widely on his subject area, with his papers appearing in Peace Review, Criminal Justice Studies, Transitional Justice Review, Journal of African Political Economy and Development, Contemporary Journal of African Development, and Ghana Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me welcome Dr. Ali Buseidu, our moderator for this roundtable discussion. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to be asked by the reputable CDD to chair this all-important occasion. I think this occasion is very important in three of several sense. One has to do with the subject matter that we are going to discuss. Anything about Parliament is of critical importance to democratic governance, because Parliament is actually the foundational place of representation of the interests of every citizen in a democracy. And the role of Parliament has always attracted mixed feelings in the academic literature. Those who write about the good things of Parliament and those who often criticize Parliament in diverse ways. So the subject matter is quite important. The second has to do with the timing We are in an era since the beginning of democratic governance in the Fourth Republic that the composition of Parliament is quite different from all the other parliaments that has come before the 8th Parliament. The evenly split of 137 seats for both the NDC and the NPP, as well as having a speaker who is not a member of the governing party, is a good opportunity for reforms, but also to make our democracy or parliamentary democracy better. So the timing is of significance. The third most important issue is the caliber of people who have been assembled to speak to this very important issue. They are well-versed, well-experienced, and well-regarded when it comes to the issue of parliament and parliamentary democracy. So without much ado, I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then they'll join me on the high table. So the first speaker is Honorable Haruna Idrisu. Honorable Haruna Idrisu is a member of Parliament for Tamale South constituency of the Northern Region and the minority leader in Parliament. He has held various positions in government, including Minister for Communications under former President Atamils and John Dramani Mahama, as well as Minister for Trade between 2013 and 2015. He was also the Minister for Employment and Labor Relations under President John Dramani Mahama. He is a politician and an institute lawyer by profession. The next speaker is Honorable Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam. Honorable Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam is the Member of Parliament for Kalga constituency of the Northern Region. He was a Deputy Minister for Energy in charge of Petroleum, former Mayor of Tamale, and former Deputy Minister of State. He is also the founder of the African Center for Energy Policy, ACEP. He is experienced with a demonstrated history of working in public policy industry. He is also a strong petroleum and energy economics professional with a Doctor of Philosophy focused on petroleum fiscal systems, fiscal policy in petroleum-led economics, institutional development from the Center for Energy, Petroleum and Mineral Law Policy, University of Dundee. Honorable Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam, if you are in this house, can you please join us? Our third speaker is Mrs. Clara K. Berry Kasati, a very good friend. Madam Clara Kasati is the founder and current head of Casa Law Firm. She is a member of the Ghana Bar Association and has publications on oil and gas law, environmental law and regulation, taxation, business law, institutional assessment, and anti-corruption. Clara graduated at the top of her class and is a recipient of the prestigious John Mensah Saba Prize, given to the best overall all-round graduating law student. She was also the best student in the law of taxation in 2009. Clara was chosen by the Campaign for Female Education, CAMFED, an international non-governmental organization, as its role model for its career and entrepreneurship fair, organized for young women in March 2010. She has held the positions of chairperson of the Student Representative Council, Judicial Committee of the Ghana School of Law, chairperson of the Voter Hall Seminar Committee, and the justice of the Legon SRC Court of Justice, and chairperson for the Gimpa Law School Seminars and Conference Committee, among others. She is currently editorial member of the Legon Journal of International Affairs and Diplomacy, and a board member of the Center for Democratic Development, CDD, among others. Clara has, among other things, developed a concept to improve tax collection in Ghana using existing facilities such as the course, which has been approved by the Ghana Judicial Service and the Ghana Revenue Authority. Clara contributes to legal education, political and institutional development through several engagements with the media and the Ghana Revenue Authority on relevant national issues. She has earned the respect and trust of the public, including members of the judiciary, the Ghana Bar, other public and private institutions, and the general public, who openly praise her in-depth knowledge of the law and professionalism. Many consider her as an inspiration. I do too. Clara, can you please join us? Our last but not the least speaker is Dr. Rashid Ramani. Dr. Rashid Ramani holds a wealth of experience and knowledge in the field of parliamentary development. He is the Executive Director of the African Center for Parliamentary Affairs. He has been actively engaged in institutional, parliamentary, public financial management, evaluation, and governance issues for the past 20 years. He has carried out pioneering work with more than 30 parliaments and governments in Africa. Prior to setting up the African Center for Parliamentary Affairs, he was a Director, African Programs of the Canadian Parliamentary Center and a consultant for the African branch and the Multilateral Programs branch of the Canadian Institutional Development Agency, CDD in Canada. Over the last 2 decades, he has conceptualized, developed, and led the implementation of numerous multi-million-dollar governance parliamentary support projects, conducted risk assessment of a number of parliaments in Africa, helped a number of African parliaments in their strategic planning, and designed and delivered training to MPs and staff across a wide range of issues. He has consulted for several major developmental agencies, including the UNDP, the World Bank, and reputable NGOs and parliamentary institutions like the CPA, HQ, and Africa Region, and the Westminster Foundation, as well as the International IDEA. He holds a PhD in political science from Carleton University, Ottawa in Canada, and has taught courses on development and conflict at that university, and has been a guest lecturer at Harvard University, as well as sessional lecturer at GIMPA. Dr. Rashid Ramani will be joining us via Zoom, and he's not physically here. Our last, but not the least, is Dr. Adam Suleiman Achansu. Dr. Achansu is a senior lecturer and the foundation dean of the Faculty of Sustainable Development Studies at the University for Development Studies. He was the Dean of Faculty of Education at the same time from 2018 to 2020. He was also the foundation head of the Department of Development Education Studies in the university from 2013 to 2018. He was the District Chief Executive of Bali District from 2013 to 2015. He contested the Bali Bombay parliamentary seat against His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, the former President of the Republic of Ghana, and the then Member of Parliament for Bali Bombay in the 2000 and 2004 elections. He also contested the seat in the 2012 elections. Dr. Achansu has a book and several peer-reviewed articles to his credit. He's a columnist in a number of electronic media, including myjoyonline.com, GhanaWorld.com, and modernghana.com, where he discusses issues on Ghana's political economy, politics in Ghana, etc. Dr. Adam Suleiman Achansu, can you please join us at the high seat? So I'm going to start by calling on Honorable Haruna Idrisu, Excellency Dr. Chiba, Dr. Ahmed Seydu, Clara, and Dr. Achansu, and then very invited guests. But first of all, let me thank CDD-Ghana for its continuous role and its continuous contribution to the deepening of our democratic ethics and values and the strengthening of our democratic institutions. Parliament has been a beneficiary of the Council and research work of many of the resource people who work for the CDD. I should thank them also for the opportunity to be here this morning to share with you on the topic Ghana's 8th Parliament of the 4th Republic, leveraging on its composition for reforms. And as observed by Dr. Chiba, to paraphrase his work, this is the first time that we do not have a majority or a minority in Parliament. I've had instances where members of my own party have said that why do you accept being addressed as minority leader? When you know that we all have equal strength of 137, 137. But I know that a political party may be constituting government, and a political party may have the support of an independent member of Parliament. And that is where the reforms should begin. So, imperative, reforms very necessary. Even the mere composition of Parliament calls for reforms. Is it constitutionally acceptable
for an independent member of parliament to join a political party in parliament within the meaning of Article 97 of the Constitution. And Clara, you are here. You are a lawyer. Expresso unius rule. Expresso unius rule. The Constitution makes specific cases for MPs belonging to political parties and MPs who are not members of a political party and are independent. And the Constitution says, don't treat them as the same. That is why in one instance, so the reform starts there. If the MP for formula was to cross carpet, the proper thing in law would be for him to walk home and resign for by-elections to be held. So that is why he carefully chose his words when he said that I will do business with the NPP. Is that the same thing as I am joining the NPP? Legally not. So legally no majority. I am doing business cannot, except by practice, mean an addition. And that's why I say go back to Article 97 of the Constitution, elaborate provision on how an independent member of parliament, if he takes a decision, can affect even his standing within parliament. My second observation, this is the first time, as the Excellency Chief observed, that you have speaker belonging to a different political party other than the party constituting government. How does he cooperate with the executive? How does he reduce the politics of undermining to see the failure of the ruling political party? How does he contribute to governance generally in Ghana? And how does he contribute to the cohesion of the country and to the building of solid democratic institutions? So both an opportunity and a challenge. I don't want to go to here in Haruna and Park. There are those who want to benefit from a particular system, yet one is disadvantaged and they still want to benefit from it. You either go with a whip system or you go with secret ballot. Each of them comes with a consequence. Now, oversight. How does 137 strengthen parliamentary oversight? And I could agree with Excellency Chiba that budget oversight remains the primary oversight obligation of any parliament in the world. How resources are allocated, how they are distributed, how they are allowed to improve the public good, how the public purse is protected and not abused. Yet, this parliament, 8th parliament, 137, the budget will be read on Monday and we are expected to pass it within 2 weeks. Nowhere in the world is proper budgetary oversight exercised in 14 days for budget. There will be no proper scrutiny, no time to analyze the budget. We may even have just a week to approve the budget. So what happens to parliamentary oversight? Let's use this name. But you see, in this situation, you cannot blame the executive. The president is now constituting government. We gave them money for appropriation pending budget. If 30th night passes without a budget, there can be a constitutional crisis in Ghana. So we have to work within the time limitations of the period in order to get a budget passed. So now, Article 67, State of the Nation Address, the President exercised it only yesterday. The debate is only today and tomorrow. Less than 72 hours for the issues that President Nana Addo presented to Parliament yesterday, woefully inadequate, for adequate and proper scrutiny, time inadequate, even for you to gather research. And Dr. Lee, you are here, some of the jobs you chested on behalf of the President. When you have Now you have a president, and those of you listening to him, pensions. Yes, that he borrowed from what I have always advised since I was Minister for Communication. I don't like silos of data, and I've always called for integration of data, national ID card, SNAIT, same system, and others. Now the president sought to respond to it yesterday with good intentions. But his good intention, we saw him say that national ID card, which has 15 million, will now be used for pensions. And that already gave him number of pensioners and some 15 million. The president can't get it right, and he couldn't be right statistically. It does not mean that every person on national ID is a worker who contributes for purposes of social security. So, statistically, he was fired. The fact that you have a national ID card does not make you a contributor to state pension and a beneficiary of pension. But the idea is a good one. He wants to integrate data, even in fighting crime. If you have a SIM, and I hope that that's why I said 2 minutes won't be enough. If you have a SIM card, the data you use to acquire the SIM card must necessarily be the same data you are used to acquire a DVLA license and the same data for a national health ID card. So integration and synchronization of data, President Akufo-Addo got it right. But the policy blueprint of declaring every person with a national ID card a pensioner, he got it wrong. But I need research to debate him. But I have only today and tomorrow to prepare for the debate. Now you understand the context in which we say that we need adequate time for debate. Ladies and gentlemen, Parliament, they say, is masters of its own rule. My understanding of the vote outcome of 2020, inevitable outcome of no majority, is that the Ghanaian people are tired of excessive partisanship. The Ghanaian people want to see us move towards national consensus. The Ghanaian people want us to see us work together. And Dr. Amin, this one, we can go to the presidency for a response. Take, for instance, COVID resources. The president yesterday announced 2 billion of COVID resources. Who got it? Who got what? We are likely to have a situation where it was only NPP businesses that benefited from it. The 2020 election reforms is that let every Ghanaian benefit from the opportunities that the Constitution offers and benefit from the opportunities that government offers, regardless of political color. So don't share national resources only to your own. Same if it was NDC. What this means is that we must share in the opportunities of the country. So if you ask the number of businesses which benefited from COVID resources, you are more likely to see 95% MPP and probably 5% NDC. That is not acceptable. That is not the way to grow a Ghanaian, because an MPP NDC business is likely to employ MPP, NDC, CPP, PNC people in the various areas of locations. Now, reforms. An imperative. I hope that Dr. Amin didn't hear this. If the opposition that I lead in Parliament is one that wants to obstruct, we are likely to be successful in obstruction. The Appropriation Act, you need Parliament, and in many. So Clara, once you are here, I'll read portions of it. Article 268 requires 2/3 majority. Article 11, 2/3 majority. Article 174, 2/3 majority. So it means that in all these instances, the new patriotic party government cannot take a decision without the cooperation of the NDC minority. You can interpret it as you wish,
But that is what the framers of the Constitution said, that Parliament shall, by a resolution of not more than 2/3 majority. So do a legal arithmetic. What does 2/3 majority mean? It simply is not a simple majority of 1 or 2. It means you must carry at least not less than 65% of Parliament along. So, for instance, can they grant tax exemptions tomorrow without our tacit support? Impossible. Can they grant ratification of mineral resources without our tacit support? Impossible. Can they annul instruments under Article 11 without our support? Legally and constitutionally impossible. So reforms imperative. Now, committees of Parliament. You all admire the way the public accounts work because it's chaired by the minority. Subsidiary legislation chaired by the minority. I believe that there are other committees of Parliament such as government assurance, in my view, should be chaired by the minority. Or simply put it, we should share the opportunities in Parliament. Why must it be one political party which chairs all the committees of Parliament and leaves a few? I'm aware that we are working towards new standing orders which may respond to this, where some committees will be government chaired by the ruling party. Some committees we may have to ballot for them, and some committees necessarily chaired by the political opposition. We are working towards it. Then this one for you to laugh, and then I'm concluding. Parliament would have had new standing orders by now, but leveraging on this for reforms. My colleague Oseiche Mensah took me for granted that morning. When I say for granted, he walked to Parliament thinking that he would take a vote on the new standing orders. And you know, I can be slippery like a frog. I'm in your pocket, I can't bite you, but I'll frighten you. So I kept watching him. Then I saw his numbers expand on the floor, determined to take a vote on standing orders. So when Professor Michael Quay put the question and said, motion number 6, motion on new standing orders. So this one, he didn't hear me. If there was cooperation, I'll sit down quietly. But because there was no cooperation, I rose and told the Speaker, Mr. Speaker, may I refer you to Article 11 of the Constitution? So he opened. Article 11(7) says that rules, regulations, orders shall necessarily pass through a mandatory 21 days to be effective. So I simply borrowed the words, Parliament, standing orders, Article 11. So I said, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Chairman cannot proceed with this motion. This is an order subject to subsidiary legislation, and I succeeded in frustrating him. Are you getting it? But if there was cooperation, leveraging on our numbers, if he had consulted and we engaged, I'll turn my face somewhere and let the motion stand and pass. So, like it or not, consultation, absolutely necessary. I could add you another example, but CDD will not be happy with me if I added it. So, Dr. Alido, let me end with that. To vote DCAs or not to vote DCAs, we led the debate. Again, the majority leader was very optimistic. So, Clara, when you come in, refer to Article 290 and 291 of the Constitution. You know, I studied constitutional law like you. So when Honorable Chairman was moving, I was watching for roadblocks in the Constitution. That is what a good minority does. I'll stop you on the law. So he was very certain that DC is to be elected. This one, forgive me. So the president, Akufo-Addo, Dr. Amin, you know, it's not every time that you get it right, even if you are president. There are times that you will get some things wrong if you don't have good legal advisors. So if you notice the president's first letter on Article 2431, he was seeking to amend only 2431, election of DCAs. But the second part of his letter was silent on removal of DCAs. That's President Nana Dankwa. So when I got a copy of the letter, I smiled. I said, oh, I'll frustrate him along the line with the law and the constitution. So when they were debating, very certain that they will be successful, I knew. So leveraging on our sides, cooperation and consultation. So when they finished everything and they were certain, I then drew their attention that the president was only interested in removing a DCE. His letter didn't address how, his letter was only addressing how you elect a DCE, but failed to address how you remove a DCA. So I caught him constitutionally and legally stuck. But you know what you don't want to hear. At that time, you know, when you're amending the constitution, you have to consult council of state 90 days. So I allowed some period to pass where he didn't have the 90 days to consult. And we got him stuck constitutionally. I've given you these examples for you to appreciate why there must be consultation and cooperation. Now, Excellency Chiga and our very distinguished resource people, go back to the parliamentary history. At every time, the first deputy speaker was to the party in opposition, but with majority. It only changed during the time of Ken Jirasa and Peter Alajete, when the NDC sought to put a candidate for the speaker. I think that we should go back to the practice where, with these numbers, the first deputy speaker must necessarily go to the strongest opposition party in numbers. We've done that before. You can study the history. It only changed when the NDC refused to cooperate with the election of Speaker Alajete and then brought in a candidate. Then committees of parliament. I believe that the appointments committee should either be chaired by the minority or vice chaired by the minority. I'm ranking member. And I end it here so that my colleagues will have a bite so that I don't take all the time. So once again, let me thank you for the opportunity. I believe that our numbers must be one for which we are collectively working for the good of our country, protecting its public purse. And I cannot end, Clara, without a comment on corruption. How does this help us to fight corruption? To strengthen our democratic institutions, increase budgetary and timely release of money to those institutions, and then increase the power of parliament to investigate and seek to punish public officers who betray the public trust. There must be dire consequences for the betrayal of the public trust, particularly when people want to amass wealth to the disadvantage of society and to the disadvantage of the Ghanaian public. So let me end it here, once again thanking CDD, and say that I look forward to genuine, sincere consultations, not consultations where, like I gave you on this, in my heart, there was no sincerity because I didn't share my frustration. But I took advantage of it. So you need consultations that is open and sincere for the good of the Ghanaian public. Not consultation where you are still hiding partisan motives and motives that benefits or enriches only your political party. I thank you, Doctor. God bless.
Thank you so much, Honorable Leader of the NDC caucus in Parliament. I now have the privilege to invite Honorable Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam to make his submission.
So, moderator, do I have anything to add to what leader has said? Speaking after leader is always difficult, you know, especially when I'm a new member of parliament and now learning the standard orders and parliamentary practices. But let me just add to what he said earlier. I mean, I do not intend to respond to the criticism leveled against the State of the Nation address, as we will have opportunity to debate it in Parliament. But let me add that the subject for discussion is very critical at this stage of the development of our democracy. You know, we haven't had this experience, and therefore, when you have equal number of membership of parliament for the two main political parties, it calls for adjustments in the way we do things. Some will call that consensus, others will call that reforms. But sometimes it's difficult to bring about reforms. And also, it takes time to get reforms. And so most of us will prefer that we must find a way to work within existing rules, or we enhance existing practices in order to achieve the objectives of national development. As most of you know, I haven't enjoyed Parliament so far. I thought I was going to do the yeah and then get a majority always carrying the vote. But what I've seen so far is not amusing at all. It's going to be a difficult Parliament. And this is why I think that we can find a way out. But so far, Parliament hasn't shown consistent path. We haven't really followed a consistent path in the way we conduct business since this 8th Parliament was sworn in. There have been times where we did not reach consensus. There are other times there was consensus. The election of the Speaker was not with consensus. Of course, it was through secret ballot. But those who didn't know, the deputy speakers came through consensus. And so it is not so bad that you cannot have the conduct of business done through understanding consensus building between the two major parties. When the Honorable Ayarga moved a motion for government to absorb the fees of tertiary education students, again, you saw the parties using their numbers. Because there is this belief that while the NDC thinks they can use their numbers to hold government accountable, there are people within the MPP who think that they are using the numbers to obstruct government. And the leader mentioned that if they meant to obstruct government, there are so many avenues for doing that. He specifically talked about the provisions in the constitutions that are required two-thirds majority to approve government policies and programs, etc., etc. But let's look at these provisions carefully. Article 11, for example, which talks about the laws of Ghana, and particularly referring to orders and regulations that are made by a person or authority given powers by the Constitution. The process in Parliament is for these instruments to be laid for 21 days, after which they become law. The two-thirds requirement is only in respect of the decision by Parliament to annul or to reverse that legislative instrument. Otherwise, the two-thirds is not required for the legislative instrument to become a legislative instrument. And I don't think that the minority has the two-thirds in Parliament to reverse such legislative instruments. The second one has to do with Article 268 on approval of agreements, natural resource-based agreements. The two-thirds there is, again, only in respect of where Parliament decides to exempt any particular class of transaction from clause 1 of 268. Otherwise, you don't need the two-thirds majority to approve the agreement. And so the framers of the Constitution knew that, and I believe they could tell that there will be instances where you will have the situation we have in our Parliament. And therefore, you will not need Parliament under those circumstances to obstruct the conduct of government business. So, leader, we may have to debate this further and further. But having said this, I think that the minority can always frustrate government if the minority wants to do so. And most of you who are familiar with parliamentary practices, it is always important for government, for the governing party, the majority if you like, and the minority to always reach a common understanding that inures to the benefit of our country. All of us are elected into this house to serve our people. And so to the extent that there is an issue that inures to the benefit of our people, irrespective of the parties we belong, I know that reason will always prevail. In fact, even in the previous parliament, where you had the majority side, for example, in the 7th parliament, having up to 169, there were several decisions that were taken through consensus. And there were issues that the majority had to give into the minority. The issue is the matter before Parliament. How does it affect us? And this is where I think that we have a lot to do. But government may decide to conduct its business using other avenues available to it, as provided for in the Constitution. Government can come through executive instruments. We already talked about legislative instruments. And the input of Parliament is not so much when it comes to those issues, because it goes to the committee discusses, and it is late. And once it's late, Parliament cannot do anything. They can't change even the wording of those instruments. The only way to reverse it is if Parliament has two-thirds majority annulling the legislative instrument. And so when we talk of reforms, this is one area I think we need to look at. Because an overbearing executive, an executive that is already not subscribing to democratic dictates, may decide to rely on these instruments to do so many things, and thereby run away from parliamentary accountability. And so this is one area we need to look at. We've seen that in the United States of America, where Obama used executive instruments most of the time because there was a hostile Senate and also House of Representatives to the Obama presidency. And that could happen in Ghana, especially when you have such avenues not subject to strict parliamentary control or parliamentary scrutiny. The second issue I'd like to talk about is this. Because of how tight our parliament is, and the minority thinking that they are a force, and we have seen this being demonstrated to please the base of the minority. We all, listen to the attacks on the minority leader and other members of the minority by the base of the NDC. And I have said that if they were in Parliament seeing how forceful the minority is conducting its business, nobody will insult any member on the minority side. But we have also heard members of Parliament from the minority side supporting the views expressed by their base. But if we don't take care, we may create false hopes in our base. And that could lead to, something else. Most members of parliament who the base is dissatisfied with may lose their primaries. And this doesn't help with democratic development, because I understand that MPs need to be in this house for 2, 3, 4 terms. Because the longer they stay, the more experienced they become as lawmakers, and the better laws they can make for our country. Also, we are appealing to a base which does not understand parliamentary practices. And so to what extent do we succumb to that base? When there is an issue that will seek the interest of all Ghanaians, then the base will call on you, don't support it. For example, the appointment of and approval of ministers of state. The president is given the power by the Constitution to appoint ministers of state. Parliament will vet them and approve. But when party food soldiers call on members of parliament not to approve this or that or that, and some of the reasons you see are quite flimsy reasons, then there is a problem. So we need to look at that aspect as well. To what extent can we insulate parliamentary practices from agitations by the base of a political party, even when such agitations are not of sound agitations? And when such agitations seek to obstruct the work of government, what do we do about that? Because of the closeness of the numbers, there is also likely to be increased application of private members' motion or bills. Because you are likely to get members of the minority side coming through private members' bills or motion. This is allowed by the Constitution, and we recently had one of such passed in Parliament. But the danger with this is that such private members' bills or motions will seek to influence government policy. And if it is coming from the minority side, will seek to implement the manifesto of the minority party, which doesn't have the mandate of Ghanaians to govern. And so, for example, the motion for government to absorb the fees of tertiary education students was to change government policy on fee payment at the tertiary education level. So that when government does not have a budget to do that, then government is not seen to be governing well. But at the same time, this was a promise made by the opposition during the campaign for elections. And so whether to influence government policy when government is not prepared for it, or to implement indirectly through the back door the manifesto of the opposition party, it will create problem for parliamentary work and also for government. And so we need to look at that. The good thing is that the framers of our Constitution saw the possibility for this when they put Article 108 in the Constitution. That any motion or a bill that will seek to put a charge or cost on the consolidated fund, Parliament shall not move that motion. This, I believe, was to check such, if you like, in quotes, unwarranted, backdoor methods of influencing government. Also, we have the Public Financial Management Act, which also imposes some restrictions similar to Article 108. Now, the question that bothers me is, and that is something we have to look at, Article 108. If you cannot move a motion that will seek to add cost or impose cost on the consolidated fund, then why should the Constitution make room for private members' motion? Because most bills or motions will have financial implications. they will have financial implications. So I see some contradictions there. And therefore, if the purpose for having a private member's motion is to be achieved, then we need to look at Article 108 again. And maybe we may need to outline certain specific areas where Article 108 may not apply in order to broaden the legislative powers of members of Parliament who will want to use the private members' motion or bills to come through. Finally, by way of reforms, I think that, number one, we tend to be talking more on consensus building and not bipartisanship. But as you saw from the votes on the 3 presidential nominees, it was bipartisanship. There was no consensus, but there was bipartisanship in respect of those 3. Because the MPP had 137 members, but those nominees got more than 137 votes. I think that we should seek to promote bipartisanship. We will not have consensus all the time. It is impossible to have consensus all the time. But to the extent that we have members of both sides of the political divide seeing reason with an action brought in by government, brought into Parliament by government, that can also help promote our democracy. So we should not focus too much on consensus building. Even though consensus building is good, bipartisanship is also key. And so I want to see a situation where members of the majority and the minority side, even in respect of private members' motion or bill, coming together on a motion or a bill, as it happened with the Road Traffic Amendment Act. This spirit of bipartisanship will convince our base why we need to live together, why we need to work together for the good of our country. 2, there are existing parliamentary institutions where we can reach consensus or understanding even before we come to the floor of Parliament. Play critical role, civil society organizations, because then civil society organizations will serve as somehow the arbiter of the two when there are critical issues of nation building in Parliament. But CSOs have to do some more work on themselves because confidence building is so important to get the two sides. But where you have a CSO that is known to support the views of one political party against the other, then such CSOs will have difficulty getting the consensus, getting the confidence of the two main parties. CSOs also have to be professional. The information CSOs give out, the reports, the papers we give out must be well informed, must be well researched. Otherwise, we are not going to get parliamentarians coming along. And then, as I take my seat, let me also say that Parliament must increase its public engagement role to solicit more public views on issues that are before the House. Through this, we will be able to understand the priorities of our people, and that could influence the work of parliamentarians from both sides of the political divide. And so I thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Seidu, for giving me the floor. And let me recognize the leader of the NDC caucus in Parliament, Honorable Haruna Idris, and then let me also recognize Dr. Amin as well as all the other dignitaries there. I just want to perhaps focus mainly on the issues of reform. You know, having been associated with our Parliament since the Parliament, I had the opportunity to see the evolution and the growth of our legislature since about 2004. And I've seen the different parties in opposition and in power. I've had, you know, very deep conversations with leaders at different times in terms of, you know, their kind of reflections on what they want to see, you know, our parliament look like. And if I sum up the conversations over the years with leaders, particularly Honorable Bagwin, our current speaker, and Honorable Chairmensa, who have swapped roles at different times, if I sum up, you know, the conversations over the years, I think what I heard from them, as well as other leaders in Parliament, is the fact that, you know, we want to get to a point where, you know, the two parties in Parliament can work together. We want to get to a point where, you know, for instance, one of the most important functions of Parliament, which is the function of oversight, doesn't become simply the business of the minority group in Parliament. And so many other kind of reforms that they would like to see. And so the moment presented itself by way of the elections that we recently went through. And I thought that, you know, we're going to have a moment of reflection by both sides, and then some confessions as well, because I've heard from both honorable members the issue of majority having its way and the minority can make all the noise that it can, and so on. Over the years, we've seen that play out. So for us, I mean, watching and working closely with Parliament over the years, we're waiting for this moment where, you know, the numbers will force the hands of our leaders, will force, I mean, both sides to find ways of working together, because then they would, you know, begin to look at, you know, things that they couldn't do when they were in minority, or things that they couldn't, they tried to do in majority that were resisted, and so on and so forth. But, you know, the circumstances surrounding the outcome of our elections and so on, you know, created this mistrust that the honorable leader has spoken about. Because if you have to work together, there has to be a lot of trust and, I mean, consensus and collaboration and so on would have to be very, very genuine and very honest. But it looks like so far we are not seeing that, even though as Dr. Amin said, there is no pattern that is emerging yet. On some issues, we get the two sides working together, even if it's on a bipartisan basis and so on. So there are, for me, a number of areas that I would like to see in terms of, I mean, if it is possible, in terms of some of the reforms that the 8th Parliament should be looking at. Number one, I think the standing orders. I hear the honorable leader about how the standing orders did not pass in the 7th Parliament. And I think this story about the standing orders started way back. I mean, I've been involved, I think, from about the 4th Parliament. CDD has been involved and so on and so forth, and we never got it to get passed by all the previous parliaments. And I think perhaps it was God sent that we didn't get it passed in the 7th Parliament. I think now is an opportunity to really carefully look at, what kind of reforms can we pass through the standing orders. Some of us have made submissions to the Right Honorable Speaker in terms of some of the things that we would like to see change in the standing orders in order to make our parliament a very strong one. The leader talked about, the issue of committees, which has been a contentious one between the two sides in the 8th Parliament. And he talked about, the fact that if you look at the Public Accounts Committee, I think it's a very important example of a committee that functions very well. And across most of the Commonwealth countries on the continent, this committee is chaired by somebody not from the party in power, but we have seen a number of other countries, particularly the countries of East Africa and some of the Francophone countries in our sub-region. They have moved ahead of our country by making sure that, there are a number of key oversight committees, apart from the Public Accounts Committee, that are also chaired by members who are not from the ruling party. Honorable Osei Chemes, the current leader of the MPP caucus in Parliament, he and I have had the opportunity of, attending some international meetings in some of these East African countries where, during conversations, he says to me, we have to make sure that we bring back this practice in our own country. So when he became leader in the 7th Parliament, I had the chance to have this discussion with him. And I said to him, look, leader, this is now the time to try and see how some of these changes could be brought to bear in terms of sharing and so on. Even at the time, we were not at this 137. Again, it didn't pass. For all kinds of reasons. So I think, it is in the interest of both parties now to make sure that we critically look at these the composition and leadership of these committees. It might look like it's going to favor the NDC now because of the fact that the NDC is in opposition. But as we say in parliamentary language, minorities and majorities change. We don't know what the next election is going to produce. And we don't want to get to that point where perhaps the group that is in majority now, even if it's a slim one, will regret that they didn't take the advantage to make sure that some of these changes are made. The second area that I want to touch is the issue of 2/3 majority. The leader spoke about it. Honorable Amin Adam also spoke about it. But what I have been looking for, and I made this point very clear recently during the orientation workshop for the returning members of Parliament. I said to the honorable members that, look, if we really need genuine reforms and we want our Parliament's hand to be strengthened, I think on a number of important issues beyond some of those that both honorable members have mentioned, Article 11, 268, and so on a number of other important issues, I think even if it's not through the Constitution, perhaps if there are opportunities and windows in the standing orders, we should move to a point where most of these issues would just not be subjected to simple majority. We have to move towards a situation where on most of these issues, I think if we can get 2/3 majority, which translates to about 206 members, there is no one party in our Parliament, whether now or in the future, I believe, given the kind of electoral outcomes that we are seeing, there is no one party that will be able to garner 206 members, I mean, in any elections. I mean, I can perhaps predict that. So, which would mean that, you know, if we get to this point on most of these important issues, then the hands of MPs will be forced in terms of, you know, coming together and making sure that, you know, we see a lot of work in the interest of the nation and so on and so forth. When I raised this issue once in a media conversation, I got a call from our former finance minister, Honorable Seth Tekwe, and he told me, Doc, this is a very important issue, but, you know, I think there might be some aspects, for instance, when it comes to some financial arrangements that would have to be exempted. But if we can move in that direction, it will really help our country today and in the future. Then the other reform issue that I would like to touch on is the issue of the private members bill. I think the Right Honorable Speaker of the 7th Parliament did a very great job. I mean, if there was any one big reform that we have seen in our Parliament in recent years, I think that this is one of it. I mean, the fact that now we can have private members come up with bills that eventually could be law. I mean, I hear Honorable Amin about the contradictions, particularly Article 108 and so on and so forth. But I think private members' bills, I think, could focus on issues that are not too controversial. For instance, when Honorable Ras Mubarak muted this idea, I saw that at least the bill was sponsored by the minority leader at the time and Honorable Chimensa and so on. So there was some kind of bipartisan approach to it. In some of the big reforms that I have seen in parliaments that I have worked in, and I can cite just one for the interest of time. In Uganda in 2001, the biggest reform that took place in that parliament was the budget law, which led to the setting up of the Parliamentary Budget Office, which has become a very sterling example for most of our countries, including our own parliament has gone to see how it works in Uganda. And up to now, we've not been able to, clearly set up one in our own parliament. That law and the subsequent setting up of the Parliamentary Budget Office was as a result of a private member's bill that was moved by an honorable member, a lady called Honorable Idris, and that was way back in 2001. You see, so setting up a Parliamentary Budget Office or setting up some structure that would help our parliament avoid a lot of embarrassment in terms of approving loans and agreements that eventually come back to haunt, the party in power and so on. If we have structures like this, I think they serve a very important technical and expert purpose that can help our MPs, whether they are in opposition or they are in power. Now, understandably, reforms would take time. I mean, they will be difficult, as we've heard from the two honorable members. They also would be challenging because of the structure of our governance. I mean, including the marriage between parliament and the executive and so on. But I think we can find windows, I think, on issues that are not controversial that maybe the two sides can agree upon. I know there are, a lot of things that will obstruct these reform processes, including, what we heard recently when there was bipartisan approach to approving some of the president's nominees. I was very pleased to see that, at least we can get members from the NDC who will say, on this matter, I agree with the other side because I think it's in the interest of the nation. In the same way as we saw on the morning of January 7, when some members from the other side joined the NDC to give us the current Speaker of Parliament that we have. But you see, we are seeing a rise in party activism. We have seen a rise in the base of our parties, particularly the NDC, where the leader has been criticized, and there was even a daring kind of attempt to drag the speaker into this. So I mean, party interest, party influence could be one of the factors that could obstruct any reform or any kind of attempt at showing independence and MPs, voting their conscience and so on issues of national importance. So maybe the two sides would have to find a way to deal with this. Today is NDC. Tomorrow it might be MPP. Then perhaps the last point that I want to make here is what Honorable Amin talked about, the role of CSOs. We recently had a courtesy call on the speaker, a group of CSOs that work on governance, including CDD and others. We had a courtesy call on the speaker where we emphasized the important role that CSOs can play, particularly on issues that are not controversial, and where based on the kind of work that some CSOs do, there are a lot of things that we could bring to support the work of parliamentary committees. And this is particularly related to the issue of evidence-based decision-making, evidence-informed policy-making, which is now becoming very important in most parliaments. And I think in our parliament currently, that is part of the strategic plan the parliament has put together. And that was one subject that I had the opportunity of discussing with honorable members during the orientation. That, look, if we can get to a point where we can find ways of making sure that members of parliament can converge in the middle and agree on some data, and then you can do your politics, but at least that reduces the extensive partisan politics that sometimes characterizes some of these important national issues. If we agree on some data that, look, this is credible and so on and so forth, now what approach do we use? And that is where we see perhaps maybe the divergence between the two sides. I mean, maybe one will take a longer approach, another will take a shorter approach, and so on. But if we can get to a situation where we can always converge in the middle, at least it will reduce the tension and so on. And then finally, just to touch on the point, going back to the issue of consensus, the issue of cooperation and so on. We need this now and we need this in the future. And I think it has to be genuine and the dialogue has to be very open and frank. I mean, I hear the leader talk about maybe some of the areas where he had to frustrate maybe some proceedings because there was no genuine dialogue and consensus. But maybe if we talk to the other side, maybe they also have the same, for instance, story to tell when the NDC was in power. And I think this might be the time for us to really have some kind of genuine dialogue in the interest of our country. And the opportunity presents itself now. Thank you very much,
Mr. Chairman, and all protocol observed. Before I say my thoughts, I want to thank CDD for organizing this roundtable discussion once more. Over the years, CDD has leveraged research, advocacy, debate, and discussions to be able to enrich the democratic space, to deepen the democratic space, and to afford us the opportunity to see how we can expand the democratic phase. For this, we are very grateful to CDD for organizing this program once more, that we get the opportunity to discuss. I also want to really thank the minority leader and the member of parliament, definitely His Excellency Ambassador Chega, and then of course my co-panelists for making the time to join us today. We are very grateful that we are here to once more have a discussion. Now, before I say my thoughts, I want to provide a brief background to parliamentary life in Ghana. And the reason I want to provide this brief background is for us to see how far we've come, for us to see what the role of Parliament is today in our governments and in terms of the development of the people. And then with this background, I will situate my suggestions or recommendations. Fortunately for us, in the Gold Coast and now Ghana, Parliament actually has a very long history. We had our first Legislative Council in 1850. That's a very long time ago. So Parliament has been growing for a very long time. But we must be careful the kind of Parliament we had in 1850. What was the role of Parliament? In 1850, Parliament was nothing more than a handmaid to the colonial governor. And I say Parliament was nothing but a handmaid because the role of Parliament at that time was advisory, purely advisory. Parliament had no powers. It was the colonial government who had all the legislative and executive power, and Parliament merely existed to support or help the colonial government. So no, when we started to have Parliament, its role was not that of a protector of the purse. It was not meant to hold accountable the executive. Rather, it was more or less a handmaid, subservient to the colonial government at the time. Then, of course, we had independence. And with independence came that we needed to change focus. Because as we know, in the colonial time, the interest was just, it wasn't to develop the people. No, it was to exploit the people's resources. So the intention of colonial government at the time was, how can we exploit the resources? The intention wasn't to develop the people. But after independence, our intention was to develop the people. It meant that we had to change the focus of institutions. So yes, we had our Parliament at independence. We started to elect representatives to Parliament. But certain things again in our history occurred that Parliament could not be as effective as it could have been. One of them was that at a point in time, we became a one-party state. And becoming a one-party state meant that we elected members of Parliament from only one party, and they went unopposed. So there was no competition. What was the natural consequence of this Parliament? Of course, they were there to help the executive, not really to hold the executive accountable on behalf of the people. And we had a very powerful executive. Then, of course, we would go through Republican changes, and then unfortunately, we had coup d'etats. And having coup d'etats meant that parliamentary life got interrupted. And with the interruption of parliamentary life meant that Parliament couldn't grow as organically as it could have been. It could have, with the effect that Parliament could not build the kind of expertise that it needed as an institution of Parliament. And then, of course, until our story of coup d'etats would continue, and the interruptions would continue until 1992, or until the 1992 Constitution came into force. So for the first time in our history, the Parliament of the Fourth Republic, the Parliament of the Fourth Republic has been the longest serving Parliament. So if we have had opportunity to grow, it has been under the 1992 Constitution, because this is the first time we've had Parliament uninterrupted for a long time with opportunity to grow. But that is not the only thing. Under the 1992 Constitution, the role of Parliament was significantly different from the role of Parliament in 1850. And the 1992 Constitution, now Parliament had teeth to bite. Parliament was given legislative duties. Parliament was given the duty of the protector of the purse. Parliament was given a lot of powers. And what was all this for? To be able to hold in check the executive, as well as the private sector, as representatives of the people. So in a way, Parliament sits there as the protector of the people's interest. Now, I think all of us here have been witnesses to the Fourth Parliament, and I think we are in a position to say whether or not Parliament has, in the Fourth Republic, has been a protector of the people, its representatives, or it has been an assistant to the executive, a role that was not what was fashioned for it. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. What I'm here to talk about is how can we leverage the composition that we have for, at the moment. Of course, we are happy with this composition because I'm sure at the back of this composition has been the constant complaint of rubber stamp, which is that once the executive had majority in parliament, they didn't need to worry about anything at all. Everything they bring will pass. But now that is not the case because we no longer have a very clear majority. In certain circumstances, they do necessarily need to collaborate with the minority to be able to achieve their agenda. In this, of course, the concern has also been raised, as we can see, whether or not the minority will have to pander to its base and say sabotage executive duty to please their base or not. Personally, I do not believe that the people of Ghana want the executive to fail, because nobody gains anything if the executive fails. If the executive fails, we all fail. So I do not believe that what the people want is for to use the current numbers to merely sabotage government business. I don't believe so. But what I do believe is that the people have expectations that for the first time, Parliament would rise up to its obligation of representing their interest, which then means that the people expect more scrutiny. The people expect that with the numbers that we have, Parliament would be able to scrutinize more. And when we are talking about collaboration, I don't think that it's only collaboration to aid the executive. I think that the parliamentarians can also collaborate amongst themselves to strengthen Parliament. So for the first time, we are hoping that when it comes to representation and oversight, we are going to have a lot more scrutiny, a lot more debate, and that this time, the two parties will put to the fore the guiding principle that whatever they do must be for the welfare of the people. Because come 4 years, it's not only the executive that is up for election. Certainly, the MPs too are up for election. So I think the people of Ghana would be in a position to hold the executive accountable as well as hold members of Parliament individually accountable for their stewardship. But that comes with my second recommendation, which is also where the challenge is. We want Parliament to be able to scrutinize transactions, to be able to scrutinize bills, to be able to debate, to pass where they need to pass, to block where they need to block. The big question, however, is Parliament, the members of Parliament, are they individually and collectively equipped to do this job effectively? I say that because as a lawyer in private practice, I know the enormous resources available to the transactional lawyer in structuring transactions and projects. Enormous resources. Private lawyers have spent years honing their skill to be able to hide what they want to hide in plain sight and to achieve, at the end of the day, what they want to achieve. The executive, similarly, has a very well oiled equipment in terms of civil servants, international consultants. So they too are very well resourced when they want to structure a project or a transaction and pass it through Parliament. So if you look at the enormous resources of the private sector, as well as the enormous resources of the executive, does Parliament have an equally enormous, well-oiled, resourced staff, research, expertise, skills, and talent available to the individual MP to be able to as well scrutinize these transactions and projects and bills the way their sponsors are able to? There's no evidence that Parliament is that well equipped. So I think this is the time that members of Parliament themselves must be interested in the office of the MP as an office, and that members of parliament themselves must rise up to give a lot more respect and to their role, in the sense that it's intended as a very high institution within our democracy. The intention is not for it to behave like the 1850 parliament, which was that of a handmaid. So I think this is the time we also have to discuss resources available to members of parliament individually and collectively for them to be able to do their job. If they are not that well resourced, if they don't have the resources, it will not be for lack of desire. They may as well have the desire to scrutinize. They may try, but trust me, it will not be effective because they don't have the resources. So I think this is one of the reforms we need to look at, is how to resource the office of the MP. At least so that the MP too has as much resources as the executive and the private sector when it comes to scrutinizing bills, scrutinizing complex and sophisticated projects and transactions. There are projects and transactions sometimes I hear the debate on, and I just smile because I know where they are holding is nothing. I know the leg they are holding doesn't matter at all. So we need to revisit that situation in terms of resourcing members of parliament. That brings up the third challenge. Now the question is, as we all know, at the end of the 4 years, MPs will also go back to their constituents for votes. In fact, not just their constituents, their delegates first. Because if you lose the primaries, you don't get to contest on the ticket of your party. So MPs do their work, also mindful that if they want to retain their seat, the delegate is waiting, and so is the voter. So what is the MP supposed to do? The truth is, will MPs who dedicate their time and effort to parliamentary work and the work of the House of Parliament, are they more likely to lose their seat, or they are more likely to be retained in office as a result of that dedication? I think we've heard sufficiently from some members of parliament that what is more important to their constituents really is whether you dole out cash, particularly for the primaries, you need money. And particularly for even the elections themselves, you need money. Now, the question we have all not asked or have been unwilling to ask is, where does the MP get the money? Now, if the MP is going to be an MP who dedicates all their effort to scrutinizing bills, transactions, protecting the public purse, is that what is going to earn them the money to dole out to their delegates and their constituents to enable them to return to parliament? So we have a situation where the people, all of us as well, have created a certain situation that makes the MP not as effective as they could be, although we don't want to talk about it. We all hate corruption, but we all expect so much from elected representatives in terms of money and finances. Where do we think they get the money from? So when it comes to that, I would not agree with a proposition that we should seek to insulate members of parliament from scrutiny from their base, for example, or from their representatives. I don't agree with that on principle. The sense that you are a representative of the people and you must be accountable to the people. We should have no excuse to insulate you from accountability to the people. Yes, ignorance is a challenge, but there's a solution to ignorance. It's knowledge and education. So maybe this is the time that MPs, as well as civil society, and all of us are interested in educating our people on the role of parliamentarians, the role of leadership, and what we expect from them. I've always maintained that you cannot go making your yardstick for election someone who has the deepest pockets. And then when the person ends up in parliament, you expect to have someone who has the deepest mind. Was that the basis on which you voted the person? No. So why do you set one criteria for voting And then after the election has been won, you set another criteria for being in Parliament. So when it comes to that, we must also the people must also be accountable to themselves as well. So I think this is time for us to revisit the role of Parliament. And I think the parliamentarians themselves have to be interested in this kind of education. I think they have a responsibility to their people to help in making sure that they educate their people very well and not mislead them on the role of the MP. And then when they finish getting into Parliament, we have a different role. So to try and keep with my 10 minutes, what I want to say is that we have to address the money issue in politics. No matter what we do, yes, we have the situation where we are complaining that, of course, one of the hindrances to Parliament is the appointment of ministers from Parliament, with the sense that, of course, for the members who form the ruling party, they are either part of the executive if they are appointed as ministers, or if they are not yet appointed, they are probably on very good behavior, hoping to catch the eye of the president. That if they are on very good behavior, the president, in case there is a reshuffle, they would get an opportunity. That's not where you are going to have an effective member of Parliament from the ruling party in terms of holding the executive in check. But if we do not deal with the money aspect, even after we have amended that provision, what is likely to happen is that the MP still needs money to be able to retain their seat. So how do they find that money? They will have to make a practical decision in whether they want to be an MP who scrutinizes bills very well, carries out their oversight responsibilities very well, and then lose the election. Because they didn't have money. By doing that, they did not spend time finding the money to dole out, to dash out to their constituents. Or we want to create an institution of Parliament where if they get there, it's not just about the desire, that they also have the resources to be able to carry, to be able to exercise their oversight responsibilities very well. So for me, in terms of leveraging, my number one concern is strengthening Parliament as an institution by providing them the resources that they need. If we provide them the resources that they need, we have an opportunity to be able to judge them at the end of the 4 years, because it's not only the executive who come looking for votes. It's also about them. So we will be in a position to be able to determine. And finally, like I said, I do not believe that what the Ghanaian people want is for anyone to sabotage any executive, because what is there to gain in that situation? So I believe that, yes, there's room for politicking. It's part of it. So we have the room for politics, but we also have room for the national agenda, which is making sure that we develop our people. So hopefully, the members of Parliament individually and collectively, and us as a people, will remember what the role of Parliament in the Fourth Republic is. It is not that of a handmaid to the executive. It is that of a strong institution which represents the welfare and the interests of the people, which will protect the natural resources of the people, as well as protect the public purse. And so hopefully they are all able to work together as an institution to be able to achieve this as well. So it's not just about having compromises. We need the compromises, but it's also about them waking up to what the role of the Parliament is in the Fourth Republic and being able to exercise that oversight responsibility effectively. Thank you very much.
His Excellency, Dr. Chega, Honorable Minority Leader, my senior Honorable Mohammed Amin Anta, Dr. Alidu, my colleague, panelists, all protocol observed. The parliamentarians have spoken. The parliamentary expert has also spoken, and the lawyer has spoken. I am an academic, a politician, and then an ordinary citizen, and I'll be speaking in those perspectives. We are supposed to share our thoughts on the role of Parliament as one of the key institutions of our governance system. There is no doubt that Parliament is very important in a democratic dispensation or democratic governance, because power in a democratic dispensation belongs to the people, and they are the ones that are supposed to take decisions on issues concerning their lives. Unfortunately, for practical reasons, they cannot do this directly. That is the reason why we have to have, or they normally have representatives to whom they entrust that decision making. That is why we don't just have such representation at the national level alone. We also have it at the sub-national level, that is our district assemblies, and even to the unit level. So that outlines the rationale and the purpose and importance of Parliament. And what is Parliament supposed to do in representing the people? They are supposed to exercise oversight on the activities of the executive. They are supposed to make laws that will guide the conduct of every spheres of our life. And they are also supposed to account to the people regarding what is it that they do as their representatives. In my opinion, our Parliament over the years have been able to do one thing. Lawmaking has not been a problem. They have been able to discharge that responsibility quite okay. The problem is when they have to exercise oversight on the executive, and then when they have to account to the people. I'm not sure they have been doing very well in this regard. We are also supposed to share thoughts on Parliament as a tool for promoting good governance. And what is good governance? Good governance is supposed to ensure that the governance process is participatory, transparent, responsive to the needs of the people. It is supposed to be consensus building. It must be effective and efficient, accountable, equitable, and inclusive. And I believe that when the parliamentarians do their work very well, they will be promoting these ideals of good governance. When they play their oversight role, when they do their, perform their legislative roles very well, and when they also account to the people, they will be promoting good governance. But what have been some of the key challenges of Parliament within the Fourth Republic? One of the key problems parliamentarians have faced is executive influence. The fact that the president has to, the Constitution allows the president to choose a number of parliamentarians as ministers, compromises their role when they have to turn around to hold the executive on its stewardship. And why is it the case? It is the case because parliamentarians who belong to the governing side will have to behave in a way that they will catch the eye of the president to be appointed as a minister. Even those on the opposition side, you know, they have promised their people to deliver development to them. So they themselves will have to also relate to the executives in such a way that they can get development projects and other things that will make them look good in the face of their constituents. Otherwise, they will not be able to come back to Parliament the next time around. So, in their quest to get elected, parliamentarians portray themselves as the executive because they end up promising the electorate what they know, and the electorate themselves know. Of course, it might be ignorance on the part of the electorate. They promise things that they know when they become parliamentarians they cannot provide, because they can't provide development projects except to go and then lobby for them, which is not something that is straightforward. The dual role of a parliamentarian as a minister and then as a legislator also compromises their role as people that are supposed to do their work as parliamentarians. Ministers tend to concentrate more on their ministerial duties to the detriment of their parliamentary duties. And that is why, of course, if I am mistaken, the parliamentarians will say. That's why most of the times you have our parliament being empty. Another problem that we have with our parliament is its partisanship nature. This makes parliamentarians, in my view, unable to assert their independent from their parties. And we have all seen how members of parliament who try to assert their independence from their parties have suffered on one way or the other. We have various examples, and the recent example of where the opposition party has descended on their members of parliament is a clear case. Members of parliament also face undue pressure from their constituents to provide things that they will definitely not be able to in terms of development projects. And perhaps this is so because of the way parliamentary candidates portray themselves before the electorate. As you have heard from my introduction, I have contested elections on 3 occasions to go to Parliament. What you should not do when you are contesting elections as a parliamentary candidate is to go telling people, rationalizing issues to the people. You must let them know that you can do whatever is it that they feel you can. If you rationalize issues at the end of the day, you should know that you are going to lose. Another issue is when have we come to a situation where you have to spend so much to be able to win elections? When I started in 2000, I had people telling me, oh, if you want to go, you have to pay for it. Because when you go, normally, you people go, you don't come back. So you must pay for it. So is it a case that it's because we have been promising our electorate to get voted and not coming back to fulfill our promises to them? That is why the electorate tend to demand so much before we get their vote. This is something that we need to reflect on very seriously. So in terms of the reforms, I think that something needs to be done about this constitutional provision of the president having to choose ministers from parliament. Of course, we know the history to it, what happened during the man's time, the reason for which we have been told that particular provision has been made. The question is whether or not it is serving its purpose. I think there is a problem. We, as a developing democracy, we might not have to do away with it completely, but we need to reduce the numbers that the president can choose as ministers, the number of MPs the president can choose as ministers. The issue about ensuring that the parliamentarians do their work the way they have to is very important, especially from civil society organizations putting pressure. We need to put a lot of pressure. Elsewhere, we have situations where people who fail to perform their duties as ministers and what have you, resigning. Sometimes you just hear that the person has resigned, you know, but what normally happens is that there is always pressure from civil society organizations to ensure that the person does not continue to be where he is when he is not performing his role or doing what is it that he's supposed to do. But we don't have it here because most of the times people who are supposed to represent us, people who are supposed to do things for us, who are serving us, end up not performing their duties the way they have to. And we don't demand accountability. And it should not be the civil society organizations alone. We ordinary citizens have a responsibility to do that. But a situation where we put so much pressure on our parliamentarians or our parliamentary candidates before they get elected, whether or not we can still have the obligation, the moral duty to demand accountability from them. MPs should, and it's a requirement, you have been elected by the electorate or the people to go and work on their behalf. And naturally, you are supposed to go back to them to account to them. We are not doing this. Listening to the majority leader this morning has made me understand certain things that go on in Parliament. How many of us have this opportunity? When controversial decisions are made in Parliament or are taken in Parliament, do parliamentarians come out to speak to the people, to give real account of what happened to the people? Or they do that in various interests, in their party, parochial interests. And I think that is what is happening. The majority should always come out to let us know. It's a responsibility that you try to let people know exactly what happens. Otherwise, when you create doubts on the minds of the people, definitely they have the right to interpret whatever happens in their own way. And at the end of the day, you may have to suffer it. On this note, I will want to end my submissions here. Thank you very much.
Let me just go straight to my question. You raised several issues. The protection of how to protect the public purse, a few days, for example, for discussing SONA and the rest. I have always been thinking that we have not been using the committee system that effectively. that in most modern day parliaments, and I think Clara raised the issue, most of the work is done in the committees. And our MPs have been telling us that if you don't see us, it's because we are working at the committee level. But when you actually see the quality of work that is being done in the committees, you realize that we don't have a good outcome. And Clara has raised the issue. Is it because of lack of technical expertise at the committee level? She's made a suggestion that maybe the MP's offices should be resourced. If it's not possible to get experts for all the MPs, can't we use some of the committees? Every subject committee has a group of experts, or we make resources available depending on the subject matter before them. They ask outside consultants to help the committee in assessing whatever the issue, whatever the document is before them. And in doing that, you get experts who are not necessarily affiliated to a particular party. And then they can, when you look at the US Senate, for example, you see they have the resources and they're able to employ quality people. Hillary Clinton worked for the Judicial Committee when she started her work. And you get some of the best lawyers, the best engineers, apart from the Office of Management of Budget, which we've been trying to set, which Rashid mentioned. They have expertise to advise them. So my suggestion is that we take a look at some of these committees. I have an issue with the appointments committee, for example. We have 14 days to approve 29 or 30 ministers. If the appointment, the vetting of the cabinet ministers is done at the committee level, you get experts from energy. If it's the energy minister, it's the energy committee that's going to vet the energy minister and his deputies and whoever is going to work within that sector. And even without getting more resources, I'm sure within Parliament, you can get people who have some knowledge of the subject matter. If it's agriculture, if it's judiciary, attorney general, so let's use them, the committees, more often. I think we've taken the appointments committee from the British system, where they don't vet the appointment of the ministers. And the appointment committee, which is the selection committee, is just used to select MPs for the various committees. The vetting of cabinet ministers is a typically American system, and they are vetted by the various committees. So I hope the MP, when we are speaking, understanding on this, we can listen.
We are also having our own people who rely on us for information. So sometimes having a forum like that to understand the workings of Parliament gives you opportunity to also further educate people when the opportunity comes. Now, I just want to pick it from the good governance definition that Dr. Achanso gave. And also listening to Honorable Haruna, the minority leader, I realized that he's so experienced, and when he wants to get something, he knows how to get it. From the experiences and the work he has done, when Honorable wants to get something, he will get it. So I just want Haruna to get we women. This month is our month. Haruna should help us get something very important. What am I talking about? If you look at the Parliament that we have, in terms of numbers of representation, because I know inclusiveness is a characteristic of good government. Now, we have a situation where we have 275 members of Parliament, proportionally it is unfair, it is not body, but the figures are as much as that because of some of the challenges of money that we will need and what that but we women always want to tell people the truth. Are the people ready to listen to the truth? They are not. So they will not vote back. Now, having said that, there is Reforms is very important.
Honorable Haruna, can you assure us
That given your
capacity to influence, you will use that strength to make sure that
my
Honorable Karaga MP will support you? Then you people will convince the others to make
a reform on representation.
representation of women in parliament. Thank you very much.
I want to make an introductory statement before I ask the question. In most cases, policies as contained in the manifesto of the party that retains or captures political power are introduced in national legislation. These arrangements often receive the endorsement of the majority in parliament. And in the Fourth Republic, it has been the ruling party. In the present parliament, because of the balance of power, Honorable Mama Mayaga attempted to get the major opposition party, as earlier indicated by Honorable Dr. Amin. The major opposition parties manifesto pledge on fees at the tertiary level to be translated into national funds. I think evidence-based policy and practice, engineered by academics, can potentially reduce partisan politics or partisan polarization, if you like, in the policy. The question is, Honorable Minority Leader, do you think this ascension can be sustained in parliamentary democracy? If no, why? And if yes, in which way can we get parliament and political parties to accept this?
Your name?
Ibrahim.
Okay, the mask, I can't see the face.
Aji Alima, I wish that your question was to the academic Dr. Achiasu and Dr. Rashid. But to respond to you, the two of them captured it aptly. Inclusiveness. How do we increase the role and participation of women? I accept it as a challenge, but the Constitution as framed today says that don't discriminate on the basis of gender. But we have a challenge of affirmative action. You can only remedy it through proportional representation. The Constitution can't accommodate it. So to do it, you have to amend the Constitution to allow for women representation. I have argued somewhere that Ghana could create a second chamber, convert the Council of State into that second chamber, and allow women in each region and each district to nominate one person to represent them in that second chamber. You can allow the youth to nominate from each district to represent them in that chamber. Persons with disability and other interest groups can also serve on it. But ultimately, if you want to achieve this, you have to amend the Constitution. As for your second question, Haruna can do it all. I won't attempt an answer because I'm in trouble for attempting to do it and failing to do it somewhere, which has put me in trouble. Can you imagine you and Clara being members of parliament, and you expect that our accompany you as to how you vote? That itself will not be conscionable. That itself will undermine your own personal integrity and your independence as a person. So in one breath, you want to benefit from a secret ballot, and two, you don't want to accept an outcome of a secret ballot. You want to employ the whip system. So I will respond to you for good reason. My mother says that my golden silence can be useful. To Alidu, the Honorable Dr. Amin is here. They are now evolving to understand policy. You see, policy evolves, and Dr. Achiasu and Dr. Rashid can explain better. Policy always evolves from need. Is this a good example? Lesbianism and gay.
is now threatening Ghana as a society. So if you are a practitioner, whether you are a chief, a traditional ruler, or a citizen of Ghana, you are concerned about it. The next question is, can we deal with that threat with legislation? So when you get to meet, you move to policy. When you think that policy is not enough, then you legislate in order to strengthen your arm on it. So that is how it should evolve. Identify the issue, let it evolve to policy, legislate if you feel strongly about it. So you can use that as example. So what do? Do we have to strengthen our laws, or do we have to amend our laws? For you strengthening our laws on it. Committee system, Dr. Excellency Chiga captured it. But again, in Clara's presentation, you would have come across it. We are not saying that we are above criticisms. Hold us accountable. The standing orders contemplate what you are saying. Our standing orders say that appointments committee, we will then have ex-official members, then call people from the standing committees on the subject area, lands and forestry, foreign affairs or energy, to support us. So if we do pass it, you will see an improvement. Now, to when Clara was speaking, take this appointments committee and see whether we played our role in scrutiny or not. I leave the judgment to you. Ours was to do the work as we do and subject people to what I call constitutional, criminal and moral thresholds. Beyond it, people can form their own judgment on it. But there's a minimum to which you should subject people to it. Now the worry, and you are right, Excellency Chiga, how can Parliament of Ghana take a day to approve $1 billion? Balogun project, it has not started yet. So nobody's interested in feasibility, nobody's interested in environmental impact assessment, nobody's interested in value for money. You even see a minister move a motion without value for money. Under no circumstance should any parliament approve any such agreement without value for money. But you hear ministers come and say, oh, I'm pleading. I'll come back with a value for money audit. They are putting the cart before the horse. That is wrong. It does not help for good governance. I agree with your proposition that there must be reforms of parliament. And just to end with Clara's call, then I come to Madam. Parliament is under-resourced, so we are subservient to the executive. We are holding a calabash looking for help to do our work. So that is part of our weakness. Even budget. Releases are poor, releases are not adequate, constituency offices have not been established, and then I agree with both of them again, Dr. Achiasu and then Clara. Our role conflict. As for me, Haruna, it's true. Internally, sir, if you say anything, I'll promise, because I want my vote, and I want to survive. I'll promise, and I'll secure my vote. Then when I'm MP, I'll go and try and see whether I can be successful or not. But bottom line, I'm there now. I'm successful. So you can hold it against me. But if I went to a community and you said, oh, there's no clinic here, my first response, when I become MP, I'll build a clinic for you. And I'll go. It's generally a weakness of our governance system, but I'm guilty of it and I accept responsibility for it. And then to Madam, constitutionally, yes, I agree with you that we should reduce the emphasis and powers and authority of the president. And I say all for all president, whether NDC or MPP. I'll just give you one example. How can the president appoint chief executive of Tamale Hospital? Is that presidential? Youth authority, chief executive, is that presidential? No. So Tamale Hospital now, you have shortage of oxygen. You are reported it somewhere. We are waiting for the president to act. But if you leave it to the governing board or authority or decentralize it, then the accountability can be reduced. I think that because of the coups we went through, we have given too much powers to the president. And it's not every time that the president is reasonable. I'll just give you an example. Article 31. So, Clara, when you have an opportunity, re-explain it. When you take Article 31(3), Parliament of Ghana, we slept, but we slept deep, excited. The power to impose a state of emergency in an emergency is vested in Parliament. When COVID happened, Nana Akufo-Addo came to Parliament as president. Parliament ceded the power to the president and was happy. That is wrong. Read Article 31(3) and elaborate legally on it. Even to renew it, it says it must be done by Parliament. But Parliament happily was saying that, Mr. President, we give this power to you. If you had a president who is not reasonable, it can create potential dictators who will abuse those powers in those instances of emergencies. And so, probably when you have a time. So forgive me if I'm not staying longer. God bless us all.
Where he's proposing the minority or even like the party in opposition to chair most of the committees, especially the one on public accounts committee. I mean, that has been the case over the years. Sorry, that has been the case for some time now because the PAC is chaired by the minority. But if I do an assessment of what we have achieved with that system, I mean, just merely having the minority person chair that, it's not working for us. So, for instance, Uganda came to Ghana, learned that concept, and what they have done is to further strengthen that committee. So, PAC in Uganda is giving prosecutorial powers. So, it is not just enough that in our reforms, we say that minority or the party in opposition should chair, but how do we make sure that even when they chair, they have the powers to be able to hold, government accountable? Because in the case of Uganda, their PAC has prosecutorial powers, and that's something they've learned from Ghana. I mean, in terms of what Doctor said, the last speaker, he spoke about the role of MPs. If we really want constituents to stop demanding for what they shouldn't, I think also there has to be some reforms around the kind of resources that we make available to MPs. Why do we give the MP a share of the common fund when we say his role is to legislate? What is he going to use that for? I mean, there's a share of the NHIs that is given to them. So it is also some of the things that is embedded that allow citizens to think that the MPs have roles just beyond legislation. Thank you.
155 were within the young MPs bracket. That means 21 to the age of 35. Out of that, only 12 young MPs succeeded in being elected into Parliament, representing 4.36% of the current Parliament. Now, the voter population, we have between the ages of 18 to 35, the youth population over 55.5 this year, or the last election. Now, attrition rate, we understand that from the 7th Parliament, 5 of them exited. That's 13 young MPs between the ages of 21 to 35. 9 retained their seats, the rest left. Now, the question I had for the Honorable Haruna Idris was to inquire how he entered Parliament at a youthful age, retained his seats, and how did he survive working with the base? What are the lessons that could be made in preparing the youth? Issues of cost, capacity, civil society, cost of politics are the huge things. Now, on Dr. Min prepared himself extensively. He talks about the fact that he's young in Parliament, but he's extensively prepared himself. So it's more of an old wine in a new skin. Entering Parliament with a lot of knowledge in terms of policy, legal issues, we heard of his analysis. When you compare that to other young MPs to articulate the issues, we just talked about connecting to the citizenry who are ignorant about the Parliament issues. How do you deal as a new entrant, your policy? How do you manage in terms of mentorship? Do you submit to mentorship in Parliament to allow yourself? And how do you balance that with the party leadership and the whip systems we have? How do you look at the next question, how do you look at the issue of capacity development and be able to look at the issues of reforms, have analysis, and put yourself up for re-election without conflicting with the party leadership?
Genuinely, it doesn't seem like you can go to parliament if you are genuine. Yes, no matter the resources you have. He's a testimony in my constituency. He went out, Dr. Chanso went out 3 times campaigning and telling people what we can do. And they're not interested in what we can do. The minority leader said it. And my brother, he answered your question. He said he's guilty of it when he goes to a community to campaign. They ask a cleaner, he said, oh, when I win, I'll build it. That's how he goes back there. CDD, most of the things you do, I see them at the high level. When Alima was speaking, she said it. We are at the grassroots. I went to Manduri during the heat of the election, just before the vote. And there was crisis there. MPP, NDC were shooting and killing and destroying things. I was almost shot. But I went to a community and a woman said something that gave me courage. Our MPP and our NDC is our savings box. That is what brings us money. That is what brings us health. How can we get this knowledge that has come into this room now to Mamprogu Manduri, so that that woman who made that statement that my NDC, my MPP, my Mustafa, fortunately both MPs were Mustafa. My Mustafa is my savings box. It is something very remote that she cherishes. No matter how much money you bring her, once it doesn't translate into her daily bread and her continuous health, she will not vote for anybody. How can we take this room to Mamprogu Manduri?
Commending our 2 MPs for working together. I heard that you are good friends, but today I have seen that you are really good friends, and it's a kind of thing that is encouraging for our environment here because of how hostile it has been. So at least this is a good thing that I have actually witnessed today. My question is very simple, and is how will giving MPs the free will to work, to operate, work for or against the work of Parliament? Because it's like, I don't know whether that's the whip system or whatever, that is preventing MPs to vote for things that they actually think that would be good for their constituents. So I expect that if I am an MP and I go to Parliament and there is a decision that is going to affect my constituency, I should actually be given the free will to operate. So how would that actually work against or for the work of Parliament? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reforms that Clara made, revisit the role of Parliament. And she suggested that it's by education. So, and that education is not only for civil society organizations like CDD-Ghana, the Council for Civic Education, even at the basic school level, civic education. If we start teaching our kids at an early age about what MPs are there to do, then they will learn that, and then the MPs themselves, they stop telling us what they cannot do. So the education should be from the top to the bottom. That's the only way we can change the system. It may take some time, but we have to change the mentality of our people, and that goes with redefining the role of the member of parliament. Once you know that it's not there to pay your daughter's school fees, to be at your funeral all the time, then you may not be asking certain things to be done for you. So it's education, 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 in my opinion. CDD, we will just be a very small part of that process, because we cannot cover every part of the country, and we don't have the resources. There are state institutions that are being funded to do some of these things. So we'll just have to call on them to also be part of this education process.
You know, I see this current situation where you can only go to parliament if you have money to be dangerous. What it means is that people can go to parliament not necessarily because they want to go and then work in the interest of the nation and the people. They may do that because of their own parochial interests. And we should be asking ourselves whether the parliamentarians we have had over the years have been serving us as a people, have been doing what is it that we send them to go and then do. If that is not the case, then we have to have a change of mind as to that kind of situation where we have to demand so much. You know, maybe it's not everybody who is seeing it, but if our members of parliament are sincere to tell you the amount of money, and even those of us that receive those resources, we know that they are not small resources. They are huge resources. And as Madam Clara said, where are these coming from? And what is happening nowadays is that you are in a community where everybody knows your status in terms of the resources that you have. Immediately you decide that you want to represent them. Then they see you as somebody who is coming from a different place. Even in our institutions, where students want to be student leaders, immediately they make that declaration. Then their colleagues are demanding from them. You have to buy credit for us. You have to do this for us. At the end of the day, when they get the position, what happens? And those of us who are managing them, we know our student leaders, most of them defraud their colleagues. The little monies that their colleagues introduce, they end up spending them. And then sometimes when you want to hold them responsible, it's like you are poking your nose into students' affairs. You know, so this is something that is happening out there and is becoming a trend throughout our society. Is that the kind of society that we want to build? I'm not sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and then for the questions. I just want to make two short comments on the responsibility that the minority leader left for me before he left. The first one is on women's representation. He talked about the issue of the constitutional provision against discrimination, which is true. But there's also a caveat in the Constitution that allows Parliament to make laws where we have an imbalance. So in short, there is opportunity for positive discrimination where we have an imbalance so that we can correct the imbalance. Now, aside from this, I think the political parties themselves can actually revisit inclusiveness, including not just gender as well as the role. And it should be in Parliament rather than a separate, we don't want to create segregation, we want inclusiveness at all levels in the society. It is possible for the political parties, using their internal democratic mechanisms, to see where they can help or support female candidates to win. Apart from the political parties, we also have other state institutions. So I think that we need a national debate probably as to how we can open up our legal avenues and then encourage more representation across the board so that we have our parliament and all sectors of our leadership reflecting all sectors of our society. The second thing I want to talk about is the Article 31.3 that the minority leader talked about. If I can just read the article. The article says that Parliament shall, within 72 hours after being so notified, decide whether the proclamation should remain in force or should be revoked, and the President shall act in accordance with the decision of the Parliament. To give a background to executive and Parliament, there's a lot of power that is usually given to the executive. Now, in the governance regime, everything is supposed to protect the liberty of the individual or the liberty of the citizen. So we put in place structures that can hold this power in check to protect the citizen. Now, what the minority leader said is true, in that if you leave the executive unchecked, it is possible to, that's how we run into dictatorships, because the executive already wields a lot of powers, including the police, the prisons, other executive branches. So already the executive wields a lot of power. If we leave certain situations to only the executive to make laws, particularly what we have, yes, there's a danger everywhere, globally, that we could risk dictatorship where the liberty of the individual would be impaired. So Article 31 provides Parliament the opportunity, even where in cases of emergency, a law has been passed, so that Parliament can, by the executive, by an EI, for example, so that after at least within some time, Parliament can look at it and see whether that law should remain in force or that law should be revoked. So this is a power that Parliament has, and it is up to Parliament to exercise it for the protection of the citizens. So these are the only two comments that I have. I think all the others have been answered to a very large extent.
The entire public accounts architecture needs to be overhauled. We need to overhaul the entire structure of public accounting in Ghana, because there are significant shortfalls in using the current structures that we have to achieve the kind of accountability we want in Ghana. So the Auditor General presents audit reports to Parliament. Parliament invites the agencies that have been cited. They ask them questions, they answer those questions. Parliament writes its reports. And then they send the report back to the very bureaucrats who were brought for questioning to implement the recommendations of Parliament. I'm talking about the budget and the audit implementation committees. And so if you look at the entire structure, somebody against whom adverse findings have been made, the person has been queried, and the person has to supervise over the implementation of recommendations from that query. That is certainly not going to work. Even if he himself is not responsible for implementing it, his associates who works with him in the same department, the same agency, the same ministries, are responsible for the implementation. They are virtually the same people because of the relationship that exists between them. To what extent can they forcefully implement the recommendations of Parliament? So for me, there is a problem, a structural issue here that we need to be able to address in order to ensure that the report, that is why the reports of the Auditor General, are kept there, they gather dust, we don't achieve anything from that. Can anybody, especially our researchers here, can you tell me how much money the Public Accounts Committee, as a result of their work, recovered, lost money, or money that has been misappropriated? How much has that process recovered for the country? Maybe our researchers should do that research for us. in order for us to determine the effectiveness or otherwise of the process. We also should find out how many of their recommendations have actually been implemented. Because every audit report that you see, the recommendations you see in these reports have been made in the last 10 reports that you would have seen. Same recommendations. And so this is why I think that we need to look at the entire architecture of public accountability. I don't have an answer. I don't have a direct answer. How? But discussing together, I think that we can find a way to strengthen the work of the Public Accounts Committee. Also, the chairmanship of the committee, as rightly indicated, is from the minority. What has been the use of that? What has been the advantage? Because parliamentary committees, by their nature, work with consensus. And so you have the membership of the majority and the minority constituting that committee, except that the chair is from the minority side. But decisions that are made are mostly done through consensus. Even when they make a decision by majority vote, it has to come to the floor of Parliament for members on the floor of Parliament to vote. And so let's look at the approval of the 3 nominees, for example, which were brought to Parliament by majority decision. The decision of the committee did not stand. And that is the same thing that happens to all other committees of Parliament. And so it is important we look at that. And this is why I agree with the proposition that we need experts working with our committees. I mean, it's possible the members just hear what is brought before them because of their lack of appreciation, because of their lack of expert advice, or understanding of those issues. Having said this, let me also correct an impression that we have experts among parliamentarians, experts on different disciplines, whether it's economics or finance or law, etc., etc. And these members go to subject matter committees, the select committees, so that the committees can benefit from their expertise. In addition to this, I know that the committees consult experts as well. When a bill is before a committee, they do bring experts in that field to take the members of the committee through and advise them on which areas to change, which areas to amend. They do that. But the question I keep asking is, what kind of experts do we bring to these committees? Are they truly experts? Most of the time, it's civil society leaders that are brought. And when I was civil society leader, I met several parliamentary committees to discuss, bills relating to the work we were doing. So it is not true that most of the people who go to meet the committees are really the experts that we all talk about. They are leaders who advocate for something relating to the bill that is currently before the committee. And they go usually advocating for what they want to see in the bill when it is passed into law. This is what most civil society leaders do. And so perhaps this is where we need to look at if we want to bring real expertise to bear on the work of our parliamentary committees in order to enhance the effectiveness of their work. The question about youth in politics, that's a very difficult question. because in spite of the fact that we have a largely youthful voter population, it is no guarantee that they will prefer young people to older, relatively older people. It is the program that you present. And as the leader said before he left, who is able to promise more when we end up getting the support of the people. But you see, young people need to understand who they are, identify their own potential before they get into this game. I went into politics very early, and I started as a deputy minister at the age of 30. When Kufuor left government, I faced serious challenges. And I've always used my experience to advise other young people who want to get into politics at that level. Because you haven't established yourself, you haven't built a profession for yourself. Right from school, you get into politics and you are lucky to be in the good books of the appointing authority, and then they appoint you into such a responsible position. Then all of a sudden, your party loses power. Or the president thinks that he needs to change you, reshuffling of his ministers, and you are affected. What do you do? What do you do? Where do you go? So that has been the problem with most young people. And just look around, the young people who went into politics, between the two parties. When one party loses, what happens? These are the people who become babies with sharp teeth, isn't it? They have to be on radio shouting louder in order to earn something. That's usually what happens. Because no skills acquired for them to earn their living through that, no jobs. And in Ghana, once you get into politics and you come out, no organization wants to recruit you because you've been tainted. So that is the difficulty young people face. And we must make the right decision when to get into politics and when not to get into politics. Otherwise, we have ourselves to blame. Today, because of the value I've added to myself, I appreciate the role I do, and I know, even before I am reshuffled, what to do when I am reshuffled eventually. But if you don't have something to stand on, that is where politics becomes a do-or-die affair for you. And that has been the bane of most young people in politics. The other problem is resources. You don't have resources to compete. Just as our women are complaining they don't have resources to compete, young people face the same problem. Unless the party sponsors you, you certainly have no source of mobilizing resources to sponsor yourself to win elections. The question on the role of MPs. I think that I'm a new MP, but I think that as a country, we have not been consistent on the role we want to assign to our MPs. We haven't been consistent at all. Some say MPs are to make laws. They are not development agents. But why did we institute the MP share of the common fund for? What did we do that for? And apart from the MP share of the common fund, we have added MP share of GET fund and MP share of National Health Insurance Fund. What are they for? They're for development. So if we say the role of the MP is to make laws, they are not development agents, and yet we put resources in their hands to go and build schools through GET fund, to go and build toilet facilities through their share of the common fund, etc., to pay school fees, then we are confused as a nation. And so we need to look at that carefully. If we want them to do development, let's be very consistent with that and resource them to do it well, to do it and do it well. If we want them to be lawmakers, let's be frank with each other. But having said this, there are MPs that can promise and get away with it because they have what it takes to use their contacts. They have what it takes to lobby to get projects. They promise and they deliver. There are MPs like that. They promise and they deliver. I mean, as Alima said, leader has what it takes to get, things done. So such a person will promise and will be able to get it done because he knows where to go and who to contact to get it done. Many other MPs may not have that opportunity. And so such privileged position, if extended to every other person, then we'll be creating a level playing field. Some have said, why a level playing field? Because politics is competitive. It's competitive. It's a competitive arena. So no need for level playing field. The end justifies the means. That's what we hear from politicians, isn't it? And so these are questions I don't have straight answers to. There are issues we have to discuss as a country, and then we should be able to find solution to that. Finally, Clara, when I talk about insulating MPs from their base, I don't mean they shouldn't be scrutinized. I don't mean that people cannot vote for you and you say they shouldn't, ask you questions or scrutinize, or hold you accountable. I mean, that is out of the way. But I was particularly talking about the party. And there is so much debate now about whether we need the whip system or we don't need it. Certainly, you went to Parliament on the ticket of a party. And so you cannot say that the party should not give directives. The directives of party usually come through the whips. But you also are representing your people. And that is why we have independent MPs. So if you went to Parliament through a party, should you succumb all the time to the directions of the party or the whips? In this case, it's going to be very difficult for you to function as MP because there are issues you feel strongly about, and your whip asks you to vote contrary to that. If you don't vote as the whip requires, and that could lead to the party sanctioning you and taking you out of the ticket, that brings back our democracy. And we know what is happening in our parties. Just as there is so much money in primaries, it is induced by the party leadership. Even when you are vetted, who is qualified to contest on the ticket of the party, there is so much money going through that. It's not just the delegates. And so where politicians or MPs are so, so much under the pressure of the party system, there is no way they can function effectively as MPs. And that we need to find a way to insulate them. That is why some people advocate that we abolish the whip system. Others say, why not? We should have the whip system, but limit it to certain subject areas, and not everything that MPs have to vote on. I think we need to look at that. It is not good for our democracy. It is not effective as a way of ensuring parliamentary work. Thank you so much.